I will describe some important position of our body. Okay, this is a supine position. This ventral portion of our body, and when patient is lying over bed in this posture, this is supine lying. When patient is lying on his stomach, is prone position. Clear? And front is supine, back is prone. Sometimes it is called ventral, and this is called dorsal. Ventral, dorsal, supine, prone. Superior, we have discussed already, superior, inferior. So, with reference of all these things, superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, supine, prone, and mid-prone mean in between supine and prone. Side lying is also known as mid-prone. Side lying mean in between supine and prone. Clear? Yes, sir. So there are some movement, special movement: pronation, supination, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, eversion, protraction, retraction, elevation, depression, opposition. First is pronation. Pronation means you are trying to achieve pronated position of the part. Okay? When you are turning from supine position, suppose this person is lying on bed in supine position. When you are trying to turn his on bed in this position, it is in pronation. Same as this is a movement which is described in forearm. This is supination, and when you are trying to go, this pronation. Okay? When you are exposing dorsal part of the body, dorsal part, this is ventral part, this is dorsal part. When you are turning the part from ventral to dorsal is known as pronation. Second is supination. When you are coming back from pronated position to supinated is supination. Clear? And there is one other movement not mentioned here is mid-prone. If you are staying in between supination and pronation is mid-prone position. Same as side lying. Neither you are in supine lying nor you are in prone lying. You are just between supine and prone. This position is known as mid-prone position or side lying position. Third is dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion means you are coming towards dorsal side. This is ventral side and this is dorsal side. So the movement described: pronation means coming towards pronated side, supination means coming towards supine side, dorsiflexion means you are, flexion means, what is flexion? Flexion means trying to approximate the thing. Trying to approximate the thing. Extension means trying to stretch the thing. So when you are going for dorsiflexion, you are trying to approximate the dorsal surface of the two body parts. This is forearm, dorsal surface of forearm. This is the dorsal surface of palm or hand. You are trying to approximate it. This is dorsiflexion. But here it is known as palmar flexion. Palmar flexion. Also in wrist, when you talk about wrist, in wrist it is known as palmar flexion. But when you talk about the foot movement, it is dorsiflexion. In medical terminology, bringing your feet 4 foot up. Bringing your 4 foot up is dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion means you are trying to approximate the two dorsal surfaces. If you see the upper arm, front is ventral, back is dorsal. But when you see the lower limb, front is dorsal, back is ventral. How it is possible? When we conceive, when we comes in conception, whole the body is at one plane. But after some period of gestation, our body rotates by 90 degree. Our body rotates by 90 degree. Then what happens? Lower limb, posteriorly ventral, anteriorly dorsal. Upper limb, or from trunk to upper limb, anteriorly ventral, posteriorly dorsal. Clear? So this is the dorsal position of limb. This is the dorsal position of limb, and this is the ventral portion, ventral side of lower limb. But when you talk about upper body and arm, this is the ventral and back is dorsal. Clear? You should be very clear. In lower limb, back is ventral, front is dorsal. In upper limb and trunk, front is ventral, back is dorsal. The dorsiflexion is the movement at the ankle joint, bringing your 4 foot towards the leg. Bringing your 4 foot towards the leg is dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion means going away from plantar, trying to approximate the ventral portion to ventral portion. You are trying to this is the ventral portion. This is the plantar. Palmar, hand, for hand we use palmar, term palmar. Okay. For feet use plantar. Plantar means feet. So you are trying to approximate the plantar position of feet towards the ventral side of the leg. This is known as plantar flexion. Clear? Supination means this. Supination means this. Dorsiflexion means bringing your feet up. Plantar flexion means bringing your feet down. Next is inversion. It is a movement. All these are movement of feet. Inversion means you are trying to bring your feet medially. You are trying to bring your feet medially. In foot, it is called inversion. In foot, it is called inversion. But in upper limb, this is an anatomical position. When you are trying to bring your palm medial side, it is ulnar deviation. It is ulnar because this is ulna. And when your ulna comes, there is movement towards medial side or ulnar side, it is ulnar deviation. And this is radial deviation. Clear? In feet, this is inversion, eversion. In feet, it is inversion and this is eversion. Going toward foot is going toward medial side is inversion. Going feet away from medial side or lateral side is eversion. Same movement in palm, coming towards inside or medial side. This is position, anatomical position. Coming towards medial side is ulnar deviation and going towards lateral side is radial deviation. Clear? So ulnar deviation and radial deviation are same as in foot inversion and eversion. Next is protraction. This is a movement over the scapular joint. This is a movement over scapular joint. Protraction and this is protraction. This is the protraction movement and retraction movement. Retraction means opening the scapular joint. You are going to approximate the scapula. In this movement, you can see here, this is protraction. Your scapula is going laterally. And when you are going, your scapula is going medially is retraction. Clear? Then elevation. Elevation means elevate the thing. Going up. When you are elevating shoulder, this is elevation and this is depression. Shoulder elevation, shoulder depression. Next is apposition. Apposition. Your thumb is a thumb movement. Thumb is touching the little finger. This is the movement of apposition. Joint movement from gliding. Okay, movements are mainly two types. Movements are mainly two types. All the synovial joint has two type of movement. One is angular movement and other is linear movement. Whatever movement we see in our body is purely angular movement. But angular movement is not possible without linear movement or without, there are two motion in the joint. One is orthokinetic motion and osteokinetic motion. Orthokinetic motion means there is motion between the joint. Osteokinetic movement, your bone is moving over the body part. Suppose this is your synovial joint, ball and socket joint. Okay. When you are going for abduction of shoulder, abduction of hip, you are seeing this bone ball is going away from your body, and we call this abduction of hip. But when bone is going away, one bone is moving away. Osteokinetic movement. Osteo mean bone. Kinetic mean going away, movement. Osteokinetic movement. But we are able to see only this movement. But until unless this movement will not be there, we cannot move our bone. So this movement, when this is going away, this is going inside. This is orthokinetic movement. Okay. So orthokinetic movement and osteokinetic movement. Osteokinetic movement is not possible without orthokinetic movement in joint. Okay. So sometime when an athlete come to us is having some limitation in range, first we should try to achieve his orthokinetic range. Okay. If we achieve his orthokinetic range, we can easily achieve his osteokinetic range. If a person is not able to abduct his hip, it means there is some problem in the gliding. The movement which occur in joint, within the joint, is known as orthokinetic movement. They are mainly gliding, rotation, or you can say spin, glide, spin and rolling. Glide, spin and rolling are main orthokinetic movement. And these movements which we are discussing, extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, they are osteokinetic movement. Clear? We will discuss one by one. Gliding is the movement one bone is moving over other bone. This is gliding. Okay? It is pure linear movement. It is not visible. It is happening inside the joint. Okay? We can feel it, but we cannot see it. We can see only osteokinetic movement. Hyperextension means this is extension of hip back and this flexion of back. Okay? Flexion, extension. When you are trying to achieve more, this is the normal range. This is the normal range, but someone who has more flexibility, they can go little more. Suppose my wrist is having this amount of extension. Okay? But someone may have more flexibility, especially girls. They have more flexibility, they can go little more. So if anyone is having capability of achieving more than normal range, we will say it is hyper range. Okay? If you are able to achieve more amount of flexion, we will say it is hyperflexion. When you are able to achieve more amount of extension than normal available is known as hyperextension. This is flexion, and when you are able to achieve full range of flexion, it is hyperflexion. When you are able to achieve full range of extension, it is hyperextension. Same as in here, flexion and extension mean trying to approximate the things and going away is extension. So it is available at elbow, it is at wrist, fingers, all is flexion and extension. And because of this flexion and extension, we are able to perform lot of work and function. Extension. This is the flexion of knee, extension of knee. Flexion of shoulder, extension of shoulder. Clear? So the movement, yesterday I have discussed you, the movement which is in sagittal plane, which is parallel. This is sagittal plane. This is the sagittal plane. The movement which is parallel to the sagittal plane. This movement is parallel to sagittal plane, but around the frontal axis. The movement which is parallel to sagittal plane, but around the sagittal axis is flexion. What is flexion? Trying to approximate the two bones is flexion. Then abduction and adduction. Abduction is going away from mid side of the body. Abduction, what is abduction? Going away from mid side of the body. Adduction means coming towards mid side of the body. This is abduction, same as here. Clear? But in wrist, we will not use it as abduction and adduction. We will say palmar flexion, and because we are trying to flex this with this. Okay? Ulnar deviation and radial deviation. Pronation and supination. Pronation and supination. This is a movement of radio-ulnar joint. Okay, radius and ulnar. This is superior radio-ulnar joint, inferior radio-ulnar joint. Okay, and when the movement is taking, I have explained you then one type of example, pivot joint. There is two joint. This is ulnar and radius head, radial head articulate with here. Okay, when there is movement here, it is the example of supination and pronation. Clear? Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Clear? Then we have already discussed about plantar and dorsal. Your foot is going down is plantar flexion. Your foot is coming up is dorsiflexion. Inversion, eversion. Inversion means your feet is approximating towards medial side. This is medial. Medial, lateral. When your foot is coming toward this side, see, foot has three level of movement. Dorsal, plantar. Plantar, dorsal. One range of motion. Clear? Second is this. You can do foot like this and this. You can see your foot come inside, inversion, go outside, eversion. Same as here. Your foot come inside, inversion, outside, eversion. Then protraction and retraction. I have given you example of protraction and retraction in scapula. Protraction and retraction. Protract mean your scapula is going out. Retract mean you both scapula are trying to approximate. Protraction and retraction is possible at atlanto-occipital joint. Okay, atlas and occipit. In out. Okay, so this is the movement. Protraction and retraction is available at your when you are chewing something. When you are chewing something, protract, retract. Your lower jaw is coming forward, going back. Hai? So when you are chewing something, there is movement in mandible joint. Is protraction, retraction. You can go for this one. This is the example of protraction and nodding the head. Nodding movement you may know. Protraction, retraction. Then elevation of mandible. Elevation, depression. Elevation, depression. You can say same as here. Shoulder elevation and depression. Elevation, depression. Opposition. I have told you when one first toe is trying to oppose this, like counting. Counting is a movement of opposition. We have given you a rough idea what is flexion, what is extension, what is abduction, what is elevation, what is retraction. We have discussed each and everything. Now we will describe the motion, different movement available at different joints. What is anatomy? Anatomy is the science of the structure and function of the body, derived from Greek word cut up. Basic anatomy is the study of minimum amount of anatomy consistent with understanding of overall structure and function, because any structure is waste when it is useless. Okay, any structure is useful when it has some function. So without physiology, anatomy is waste. Why need anatomical terms? It is easy to become confused when trying to describe location in human body. Terms like beside, under, on top are too fuzzy when talking about three-dimensional human body. Under mean it is not completely describing the motion. When we are talking about body motion, there should be some specific word which can describe the body position or part position with reference to other. So we should have a different terminology. We have discussed. They are not language specific and thus require no translation. They are universal term that may be readily understood by zoologists who speak any language. Anatomists always speak as if the body is in a standard anatomical position. So by reading the term, you should imagine what is the position of body, what should the position of part. Why need an anatomical body position? The body is standing erect with good posture and the face is looking directly forward in normal manner. What is the normal anatomical posture? This is the anatomical posture. Face is looking forward with proper eye contact. The feet are together, the arms are down at side with palm. This is the anatomical position. Next. Spatial and directional terminology. We have discussed it yesterday. Cephalic mean towards brain. Caudal mean towards tail. Caudal mean towards tail. We can also use proximal and distal. Proximal mean towards center side. Distal mean away from the center. Same as we can use in body, it is cephalic and caudal, also known as superior and inferior. Anatomical terms, midline of the body, this is the midline. Anterior mean towards anterior side. Posterior mean towards posterior side. Lateral mean towards midline. Lateral mean away from midline. Medial mean towards midline. With this diagram, we can easily comprehend what is medial, what is lateral, what is anterior, what is posterior. Spatial. What is spatial and directional? Spatial mean space. What is the direction of your body in a particular space? By using these terminologies, we can easily locate the body position and its part position in a space. Superior towards or closer the head. Inferior towards or closer feet. Medial, direction or position towards the midline of body. Lateral, away from, further from midline of body. Proximal, a location, direction towards, closer to the trunk. Distal, away from the trunk. Distal means away from trunk. Proximal means towards trunk. Superficial, closer to skin. Deep, further from skin. Superficial means the structure which are nearer to skin are superficial. The structure which are away from skin. So there are three reference points. One is trunk is reference point. Other is your head is reference point. And in third, your skin is reference point. When you are talking about superficial and deep, so we will take skin as a reference position. Anything which is nearer to skin will termed as superficial. Like you may see in any injury, it is you can say this person has superficial injury, this person has deeper injury. Okay, so by checking the position of injury with reference to your skin, you can decide if the injury is either superficial or deeper. Same as we can define, we can classify different tissues. Which tissue is superficial, which tissue is deeper. Like when you talk about your body, skin is the most superficial. After skin, there is fascia. After fascia, there are some superficial muscle, then deeper muscle, then tendon, ligament, bursa, then bone, cartilage, then bone marrow. So when you talk about the hierarchical level of positioning of different tissues in body, okay, we were discussing about the different terminologies which is used to describe movement. Just see this diagram, and by seeing this diagram, you are able to define or differentiate what is lateral, medial, superior, anterior, caudal, cephalic. Superior mean towards the head. Inferior mean towards the feet. Lateral mean there is a midline, a vertical line which divide your body into two equal halves. So that line is considered as a midline. So anything which is away from the midline is lateral. Which is near the midline is medial. Anything which is coming towards midline or the body is medial. Anything which is going away from the midline is lateral. Same as you can say proximal and distal. I have told you in measuring proximal and distal, trunk is a reference point. Shoulder is proximal to elbow. Elbow is proximal to wrist. Wrist is proximal to finger. Okay? So we will measure the nearest location of the part. When we are comparing two things, which one is nearer to your trunk will be termed as proximal. Which one is nearer or distal to your body is known as distal. Then come to the front and back. Front, back, left, right. You all are next slide. When you see the lateral view, this is the lateral frontal view of the body, and this is the lateral view. When you see from lateral side, superior mean or cephalic mean head. Caudal or inferior mean towards tail or feet. Anterior, posterior. Now come to number of motions available at different joint. This is very important for us because we are having different sport, we are using different joint in different activities. So which joint has this type of motion, we should be familiar with all these motions. It is a relative movement of a limb around a joint. Joint is fixed. Joint is always located at one point, and your body part is going sometime going away from the joint in this direction, sometime that direction. So what are those movements? What are those movements called? We will discuss here. Major joints are neck, trunk, shoulder, elbow, hip, knee, ankle, and scapula. There are two types of joint. When we talk about the structural anatomy, some one are smaller joints, some are major joints. And major joint plays very important role in different function and athletic activities. So these are the joint: neck, trunk mean spinal joint, elbow, hip, knee, ankle, and scapula. These are the joints which are used for mainly used for most of the range of motion as well as most of the function. Movement is around a specific planes and joint. From base will be always anatomical portion, and we will define the movement with reference to anatomical portion. Any movement which is going away, towards side, midline, superior, inferior, we will consider all these terminology as a reference point, then we will define the movement. First, we will discuss the movement available at shoulder joint. Shoulder joint, we have seen there is a approximation of head of humerus and acetabulum, glenat cavity of scapula. But shoulder joint is not controlled by only one joint. There are number of joints in shoulder, and shoulder range of motion or shoulder movement is not only because of glenohumeral joint. Shoulder motion is not only because of glenohumeral joint. This is the joint, this is the humerus, and this is the scapula. Humerus and scapula. You can see here in the hip joint, cavity is larger, ball is smaller. Okay, so hip joint is more stable. Hip joint is more stable. It is type of ball and socket joint. But same as here, and a ball is fully rounded. You can see scapula. This is scapula, and this is glenoid cavity. USC can see here cavity is smaller. Cavity is smaller and shallow. Whereas here cavity is larger and deep. Cavity is shallow, head is larger. This is also an example of ball and socket joint. That's why, because of smaller cavity and larger shape of the head, the range, more range is available at shoulder in comparison to, because it is out, always out. It can go up to any extent. You can go for full flexion. You can go for full abduction. You can go for full rotations. Clear? 90-degree rotation. Full rotation. Because of less cavity and ball is larger, so ball is always out from the cavity. So it has less stability but more mobility. When you see your hip joint, ball is larger, fully fitted, so there is less chances of going out. As well as the strongest ligament, that is iliofemoral ligament of the body, is attached here. So ligament is not allowing the bone to go out more. That's why hip has less range of motion in comparison to your shoulder, who has full range of motion. So I was telling you the shoulder joint, this is shoulder joint, but shoulder mobility is not only because of this joint. There are other joints. One is sternoclavicular joint, sternoclavicular joint, acromioclavicular joint. This is clavicle. This is a clavicle. From one side, it attached to sternum. From one side, the clavicle attached to sternum is known as sternoclavicular joint. From other side, the clavicle attached to acromion. This is the acromion process of the scapula. This is the acromion. This is the here. This is acromioclavicular joint. Then glenohumeral joint. Then there is a scapulothoracic joint. Scapula is attached with the rib. Scapula is attached with the rib. Scapulothoracic joint. And glenohumeral is this one. So there are, we can see here, 5 joints. So shoulder joint mobility is a result of mobility available at 5 joints, out of which the maximal mobility available at glenohumeral joint. Maximum mobility, this is glenoid cavity and humerus. This is glenohumeral joint. Maximum mobility is here, but some of the mobility is augmented by AC joint, sternoclavicular joint. The whole shoulder is moving when you are going like this. So there is some mobility here also. Clavicle, this is your clavicle bone, attached one side here, one side here. Your acromion process is attached with the clavicle, AC joint. So all mobilities of shoulder is because of all these joints. Next, now we will discuss about glenohumeral joint. What is glenohumeral joint? The glenohumeral joint is a ball and socket joint, 3 rotational and 3 transitional degree of freedom. We will discuss what is rotational angular movement. Flexion, 1 degree of freedom. 1 degree of freedom. 2 degree of freedom. Movement in one plane, movement in other plane, and movement in third plane. Okay, it means 3 rotation. Rotation means angular movement. 3 rotations are available. Clear? The 3 other linear motions are, you can distract. Orthokinetic motion. Ortho, it means You are trying to create some mobility. There is no movement in the bone, only movement in the joint. Okay, this is one component of linear motion. Second thing, it can go in this, when you are going to create mobility in this plane, no bone is moving like this, but there is some movement, linear motion in AP direction, anterior and posterior direction. Some movement available in lateral and medial direction. Some movement is available in inferior and superior direction. So there are 3 degrees of freedom, linear freedom, and 3 degrees of angular freedom is available. So 3 degrees of osteokinetic movement and 3 degrees of orthokinetic movement. And for a physical educator, when we feel a person has limited his range of motion and without full range, without full muscle power, you cannot perform best in your athletic activities. For a proper performance, you have full range of motion as well as full muscle power. So until unless we will not achieve person full range of motion, person will not perform. So how can we achieve? First we will try to achieve this motion. Until unless this motion is not available, it cannot achieve. Okay, for achieving this in full, it should be full. So there are 3 degrees of freedom in angular motion and 3 degrees of freedom in linear motion. That's why shoulder joint has 6 degrees of freedom. Are you get it? Next, movement in coronal, back. Movements in coronal axis. Coronal axis kaho ya frontal axis kaho. This is the frontal axis. This is the, ये frontal plane है, ये frontal axis है. If any movement is here or over this axis, this is acting as an axis. This is fulcrum. This is a fulcrum. Front is the fulcrum. Any movement which is taking place over the front is known as frontal axis. Movement over frontal axis. The whole shoulder flexion and extension is taking place over frontal axis. Second is, term applies only the movement along the sagittal or medial plane, e.g. lifting or dinner plate. Lifting or dinner plate. ये हमने दिखाया, it is the movement, functional movement, and is the, you are doing any work. When you are doing lifting a plate, it means you are going for flexion. Extension, there is an increase in angle between body segment, bringing arm behind the back. Bringing arm behind the back. It is the same frontal motion at frontal axis, but parallel to sagittal plane. So this is flexion of shoulder joint and extension up. Remember thing, when you are seeing the osteokinetic movement, you are seeing the flexion, you should see the here ki whether person is not able to perform movement because of limitation of that. When he is going for flexion, head should come back. You can see here. Okay. When patient is going for extension, head should come. So there is linear motion. This is PA motion. PA, posterior anteriorly movement of the head. Posterior anteriorly motion of the head. This is AP motion. Anterior posteriorly motion of the head. And during AP and PA in the shoulder joint, you will have flexion and extension. Next is movement along the AP axis. We have discussed about the movement along the frontal axis. Now we are going to discuss about the movement of shoulder joint along anterior posterior axis. Anterior posterior axis mean this is the anterior, this is the posterior. This form the anterior posterior axis. This is anterior posterior. This form the anterior posterior axis. Any movement which is taking place over this axis is known as anterior posterior axis movement. Abduction and adduction. Abduction means going away from midline of the body. Adduction means coming towards the midline of the body. Is a movement at anterior posterior axis, and movement is parallel to frontal plane. So the second important motion of shoulder joint is abduction and adduction. Holding the arms out at one side is called abduction. Holding the out one side. Clear? Adduction, a motion which bring a component of joint towards the midline of body, is called adduction. Movement along the longitudinal axis. This is our longitudinal axis. Vertical or longitudinal, both are same thing. Vertical, axial, longitudinal, both are the same word, differently you sometimes axial you are using, sometimes you are using longitudinal, sometimes you can use vertical. This is the axis. Any motion along that axis is motion around vertical axis, around longitudinal axis, you can say anything. So we have already discussed about motion around frontal axis, that is flexion extension of shoulder. Motion around sagittal axis or AP axis is the motion of abduction adduction. Third degree of freedom of shoulder joint is rotation. Shoulder can go for internal rotation and external rotation. In internal rotation, what happens when your shoulder internally rotate, your ball can come in. Your ball should come towards the glenoid cavity. And in external rotation, its ball should go out of the cavity. Okay. Internal mean or medial. It is also known as medial and lateral rotation. Okay. Internal rotation and external rotation, also known as medial and lateral. Medial mean towards inside, internal. Lateral mean towards outside, mean external. Okay. So when your ball of humerus is coming towards glenoid cavity, we will say it is internal rotation. So when you are in an angle motion, when your thumb come in, it means ball is coming towards, you can feel here, you could put your finger on ball and you can feel. When you are doing like this, your ball will come towards the glenoid cavity. This is the internal rotation. And when you are doing like this, your ball is going away. You can feel, you will feel a movement. When you put a finger here, you can feel a motion of head. Head will go, your finger will move away from your body. It is lateral rotation or external rotation. Is along, this is the axis, this is the axis, this is the axis transverse plane, and your motion is taking place like this. It means along the vertical axis. Third movement, lateral rotation, the movement that result in anterior surface of the part facing laterally. This is the anterior surface of part. If it faces laterally, mean away from the body, is lateral rotation. If your faces of the body is facing medial side of the body, is medial rotation. Next and very important motion in which you may get always confused, someone think this is the shoulder circumduction. Circumduction is a movement, multi-directional movement. Earlier we have discussed motion in one axis and one plane. Okay, either abduction and adduction, movement over one axis, one plane. Flexion, extension, motion in one axis and one plane. Rotation, movement in one axis and one plane. But circumduction is the combination of movement. This is the movement of circumduction. You can see your shoulder is going in extension also, it means one axis, then abduction also, then flexion also, then rotation. It means attempting all three coordinates of movement in one function. This is the circumduction. You can do it like this also. Your ball is moving all around the coordinate of joint. Circumduction, swinging a long bone in a large circle around a joint. For example, swinging the arm in a circle around the shoulder is called circumduction. So never get confused with rotation and circumduction. Circumduction is the movement of or swinging of ball in all direction. AP axis, lateral axis, sagittal axis, vertical axis, whereas all other movements are angular movement in only one axis and one plane. Clear? See here, we are trying to explain the movement with the help of diagram. First diagram shows shoulder flexion and extension. Other diagram shows shoulder abduction and adduction. Third diagram shows medial and lateral rotation. You can perform shoulder rotation in this plane also. This is also shoulder rotation. Your shoulder come in, out. No, this is here when you are bringing your arm closer. Sometimes person can get confused. When you are doing this, inside middle rotation, outside external rotation. But when you put your arm like this and when you are coming towards mid side, your ball is going outside. This is internal rotation and this is external rotation. Because you are seeing the movement here, but you should feel the movement here. Sometimes patient is thinking, okay, body is going away from the body, so it should be external. And body is coming towards body, so it should be internal. But we are seeing the movement over shoulder joint. So we should take the reference from shoulder, where ball is going in or ball is going out. So we should put our finger here and then feel the movement. If you do like this, ball is coming in, out, ball is coming out. But if you keep the same movement here, it is also rotation. But when you are bringing your arm closer, shoulder ball will go out. You can see here. When you are putting lean, it can come, it is coming in. Clear? Next was abduction, bowling. Bowling is a movement of circumduction. Clear? And most of the sport need circumductory movement. Suppose when you are going to hit a ball from a stick, going for extension, abduction. There is one other movement which is always ignored in shoulder joint, is horizontal abduction. I have mentioned about abduction, flexion, extension, rotation, but there is one movement, horizontal. This movement is parallel to this is the horizontal adduction and horizontal abduction. See, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and this movement is horizontal abduction and adduction of shoulder joint. Next is scapulothoracic joint. We have discussed the movement around the humeral ulnar joint, glenohumeral joint. We have discussed the motion which is available over the glenohumeral joint. Now we will discuss the movement which is because of scapula and thorax. Scapula and so this is thorax and scapula. And scapula is attached with the thorax posteriorly with the rib and anteriorly with the sternum. So we will discuss the movement over the scapulothoracic joint formed by articulation between scapula and thorax. Upward, downward rotation can be defined by upward and downward movement of glenoid fossa. So the next slide. See here. Abduction and adduction, retraction and production. This is the posterior side of scapula. This is the normal anatomical portion of scapula. When it is coming, this is protraction. When your scapula is coming towards mid side, it means lateral component is trying to achieve your mid side. This is protraction. This is retraction. Go again back. Next movement is elevation and depression. Elevation, depression, protraction, retraction is not a movement of glenohumeral joint. These movements are the movement of scapulothoracic joint. Clear? You can feel all movement at shoulder joint, but shoulder joint is not a one joint. Shoulder joint is made up of number of joints. We have discussed the movement of glenohumeral, 3 movement, 3 or plus 1, 4 movement. Flexion, extension, 1 movement. Abduction, adduction, 2 movement. Rotation, medial lateral, 3 movement. Horizontal abduction, adduction, 4 movement. And 5th one is the circumduction. Now we are discussing the movement at scapulothoracic joint. First was retraction and protraction and elevation and depression. This movement is not over glenohumeral joint. This movement is over the scapulothoracic joint. Elevation of shoulder, depression of shoulder. Elevation of shoulder, depression of shoulder. This is very good exercise for your extensor of trapezius muscle. Protraction, retraction, internal and external rotation. Not clearly identifiable. Internal and external rotation with protraction. Posterior, there is internal and external rotation available at scapulothoracic joint also. Okay. Internal and external rotation is available over glenohumeral, as well as it is also available at scapulothoracic joint. So the next, see here. This is your scapula. Scapula is rotating downward and upward. This is your scapula, upward rotation, downward rotation and upward rotation. So scapula can rotate in this plane also. Next is superior view, anterior tipping and posterior tipping. Anterior tipping, scapula is coming towards inside, scapula is coming outside. Anterior tipping and posterior tipping. There is one very important muscle known as serratus anterior and rhomboids. Serratus anterior and rhomboid. When you are going for push-up exercises, very good exercise for your strengthening of your scapular stabilizer muscle. and they are very important muscle for most of the activities. Like when you are going to hit a tennis ball or any hitting, it requires proper strength of your serratus anterior and rhomboids. When you are climbing something, climbing muscle, latissimus dorsi is the muscle climber. When you are going for climbing, it is the muscle which are responsible for climbing activities are latissimus dorsi, and these muscles are inserted over here. But if there is any deviation, any misalignment in scapula, clear, the muscle which are attached from this side get shortened, because scapula initially it was like this, it can become like this. So the muscle which comes from head of humerus to scapula get shortened, clear, and the muscle which are from ribs to scapula get lengthened. Are you getting or not getting? So because of malpositioning of any bone, it will have direct effect of shortening or lengthening of the muscle, and muscles are the dynamic stabilizer. And we all know when muscle is altered from its resting length, muscle cannot generate maximal force, because the most force generation by muscle is because of cross bridge formation between actin and myosin. When muscle is at its resting length, there will be maximum cross bridge formation, and cross bridge formation is directly proportional to torque generation. When more cross bridges, more torque. Less cross bridges, less torque. What happens when muscle is lengthened? This is the normal sliding filament theory. Actin and myosin slide over each other and form cross bridges and generate tension. But what happens for those muscles which get lengthened? Because of lengthening, actin and myosin are further. When they slide, there is no attachment with actin and myosin, no cross bridge, no force. Clear? And same as for the other muscle which get shortened, because of over shortening, the muscle get collapsed, and because of collapse, they are not able to make cross bridges. So because of malalignment or excessive rotation, because of excessive mobility of the bone, it can direct effect over muscle, and when your muscle will be affected, your muscle cannot generate force, and when your muscle will not generate force, it will not have any control over bone, so bone can go anywhere, it will impinge with any structure and damage them. Because bone is harder structure, if it is not aligned properly, it is here, okay, but if it is going somewhere else, it can damage the other structure, because God has given proper space for every structure, clear? But if something is uncontrolled, if you are riding bike over road, okay, but if you are uncontrolled, you can damage someone or you can damage yourself. Same as if the bone is attached at its normal position, it will function properly. But if it will deviate from its position, it can move to other places, and other places are filled with some vital structure, maybe filled with some soft tissues, and that tissues can get damaged because of hardness of your bone. So you can see here, there are three motions in scapula, either upward rotation or downward rotation. There protraction, retraction, protraction, and this is protraction, and this is retraction, and this is anterior tipping and posterior tipping, anterior tipping and posterior tipping. Okay? Elbow joint. So we have discussed about the glenohumeral joint as well as scapulothoracic joint. There are some AC joint movement, AC joint, acromioclavicular joint. It also has role in mobility, but its role is augmenting the glenohumeral joint. Glenohumeral joint is going to achieve full from here to here, but this movement is not only because of your glenohumeral joint. This movement is because of your glenohumeral and acromioclavicular. When you are achieving 180 degree of abduction, two portion of range is completed by your glenohumeral joint, but one portion of abduction is achieved by your mobility at or orthokinetic at AC joint. So most of the athlete has history of AC joint strain. Most common condition in athlete, because this is a clavicle, and when you are doing any movement, there is friction, and because of friction, this can get wear and tear, and patient has problem. And when there is any least mobility, any limitation in AC joint, patient will not be achieve full range of motion, or he will try to achieve full range of motion, he will damage his GH joint also. So for proper coordination, there should be proper mobility available at AC joint as well as your glenohumeral joint. So I have told you full abduction. Abduction is not only because of glenohumeral joint, it is because combination of, it is a movement which is combination of glenohumeral movement as well as acromioclavicular movement. So we have discussed all movement available at the scapulothoracic, acromioclavicular and glenohumeral joint. Same as we are going for inspiration and expiration. It is not shoulder, but it is linked with the shoulder motion. If there is any pathology in your shoulder or scapular bone, it can affect the mobility of your sternum as well as mobility of your thoracic cage. Your chest expansion capacity will be decreased. When your chest expansion capacity will decrease, your lungs will not inflate properly. When your lungs will not inflate properly, you will inhale less oxygen. When you will inhale less oxygen, your energy generation capacity will be ultimately decreases and you will get tired within one practice. Okay? So bone are indirectly helping in the physiology of respiration, physiology of heart. So we should have proper health of bone, and by maintaining proper health of bone, we are indirectly helping the respiration of physiology of respiration as well as the physiology of circulation, which is must. Lungs and heart should be strong enough, healthy enough for performing any athletic activity. Now come to elbow joint. Elbow joint is the next joint to the shoulder. It is hinge joint. It has 1 degree of freedom, only flexion and extension. Elbow joint is made up of humerus and ulna, not radius. Radius doesn't make any attachment with the humerus. Elbow joint has only 1 degree of freedom, that is flexion and extension. You can see here only your ulna is going to attach with the condyle of humerus. This is your humerus and this is your ulna. This is trochlea. This is trochlea and this is olecranon process. This is olecranon process. Only 1 degree of mobility is available here. Clear? Include the humero-elbow-ulnar and humero-radial joints, the proximal, distal, radio-ulnar joint. Elbow joint is mainly because of approximation ulna and humerus, but distally. Distally mean, can you come here? Please, can you come here? See, this is a elbow joint, but your radius head is attached with this here. This is the complete elbow joint. So the mobility of flexion extension is not because of radius. Mobility of flexion and extension is because of humerus and ulna. But supination and pronation is because of superior and inferior radio-ulnar joint. Superiorly radius attached here, and inferiorly there is joint, fibrous joint. We have discussed in morning. There is some fibers which are originating from here and attaching here, and it is responsible for motion at lower arm, forearm because of supination and pronation. Thank you. 1 degree of freedom movement is possible. Flexion and extension or elbow joint, radio-ulnar joint permit supination and movement. Don't confuse. Elbow joint motion is only because of mobility at ulna and humerus, whereas supination and pronation is because of mobility of superior and inferior radio-ulnar joint, which is not formed at elbow. It forms just distal to elbow joint. This is elbow joint and it is distal. This is the distal, proximal, distal to elbow joint here, and one joint form here. Flexion and extension occur in sagittal plane. Flexion and extension occur in sagittal plane. This is sagittal plane, and flexion and extension is always, motion is always parallel to plane. So flexion and extension occur parallel to sagittal plane and over the frontal axis. Extension means straightening the joint and usually takes place in the posterior direction. And anterior flexion, if it is going toward posterior, is extension. Supination and pronation occurs in transverse plane. This is the transverse plane, and if motion is occurring here, this is the movement of transverse plane. Pronation, medial rotation of forearm. Pronation means you are trying to bring your forearm medially. Supination means lateral rotation of forearm. Your forearm is rotating. Supination is medial rotation of forearm, whereas pronation is the lateral rotation of forearm. Supination, lateral rotation of forearm. We can explain this movement by a diagram. You can see in the first diagram there is the person is flexing his elbow, and other diagram by dotted line is person is extending his elbow. In the next diagram, person is going to achieve forearm supination, and again he is going to achieve forearm pronation. Now come to wrist joint. Wrist joint is mainly because of radius, ulna and carpal bones. We have told you there are 8 carpal bones, but all carpal bone doesn't make wrist joint. It is only some lateral bones and medial bone, which lateral side is scaphoid is attached with radius, and medial side hamate is attached with ulna. Wrist complex consists of radiocarpal and midcarpal joint. Radiocarpal means attachment of radius with scaphoid, making joint of radius, distal length or stellate process of radius with scaphoid bone of carpal. And second thing is mid-carpal joint, means joint formed between different 8 carpal bones is known as mid-carpal bone. And mobility at wrist joint is because of mobility at all these joints. Flexion, the angle between the hand and the forearm decreases with the palm facing the wrist with forearm supinated. Flexion, you can see the angle between hand and forearm decreases. This is hand, this is the 180 degree. This angle is 180 degree. When you are going to decrease this angle, now it becomes 90. You can go a little more. Okay. So you are trying to decrease the angle between forearm and palm. This is known as flexion, also known as palmar flexion. Palmar, because palm is coming towards your forearm, always it is known as palmar flexion. The extension is the angle between the hand and the forearm increases with the palm moving away from the forearm. This is your forearm, and you are trying to move your palm away from in normal anatomical position. In wrist extension, you are trying to move your palm away from your forearm. It means if you perform the same movement in prone position, you are trying to approximate the dorsal surface of palm with the dorsal surface of forearm. You are trying to approximate. That's why it is also known as either wrist extension or dorsiflexion of the wrist joint. Next is radial deviation, position of hand when the wrist move away from little finger. This is radius, and this is ulna. Medial side is ulna and lateral side is radius. When your palm is moving away from midline or your palm is going towards radius, is known as radial deviation. Clear? And when your palm in normal anatomical position is coming towards your midline or coming towards ulna or trying to approximate with ulna, is ulnar deviation. This is the example with diagram. Flexion of elbow, you are trying to approximate the palmar surface of wrist with the forearm. In extension, you are trying to approximate the dorsal surface of palm with the forearm. Radial deviation means your thumb is going away from your body, and in ulnar division, your little finger is coming towards midline of the body. Supination and pronation, I have explained you. Now come to movements of hand. This is your hand, and it is made up of number of bones. This is the metacarpal. These bones are metacarpal, then carpal, first carpal, then metacarpal, then phalanges. Proximal phalangeal joint, distal phalangeal joint. First MCP joint, first metacarpophalangeal joint. This joint is known as first metacarpophalangeal joint. This is distal phalangeal joint, DIP, distal interphalangeal joint. This is metacarpophalangeal joint, proximal interphalangeal joint, and distal interphalangeal joint. These are the terminology used for different joint of palm and hand. Clear? Movement associated is flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, and opposition. Flexion of finger. Even you can have flexion over, this is the flexion at DIP. Flexion at DIP, distal interphalangeal joint. Flexion at PIP, proximal interphalangeal joint. Flexion at MCP. Flexion at MCP means metacarpophalangeal joint. These are the movements which are available and which are defined in terms of these name of the joint. Flexion at DIP, flexion at PIP, flexion at MCP. Same as adduction. When you are trying to approximate the finger is adduction, and we are trying to open the finger, abduction. Adduction, abduction. Adduction, abduction. And opposition. Opposition is the property of your first MCP joint. When you are trying to count number, you are trying to approximate the thumb with other fingers, are known as opposition. There is one movement available in your thumb is known as circumduction. You can see here it can move in all directions. This movement is the name. This is named as circumduction of the first MCP joint. You can see here flexion, extension of at first DIP joint. Same as opening thumb to finger, opposition. Opposition in this diagram, palmar adduction. Palmar abduction, this is palm. The thumb has other movement also. Apart from flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, your thumb has some extra movement because thumb is the most important structure of your hand. Okay? When you perform any function, if you lose your thumb, you cannot do most of the work. Like you may heard about the Mahabharat Eklavya. Because of thumb, the Guru asked him for his thumb. Because if he knows if he will lose his thumb, he cannot do anything. Thumb is the main. Without thumb, we cannot perform most of the activities, as most of the game. So, God has given some extra amount of mobility as well as different degree of freedom to your thumb. One is palmar abduction. Your thumb is, one is opposition, but one it is coming towards palm. Palmar adduction, palmar abduction. Abduction, abduction. Circumduction. Okay, now come to mobility at spine. Mobility at spine. Spine is made up of, we can divide spine in cervical spine, then dorsal spine, then lumbar spine, and then sacrum, then coccyx. Total there are 33 bones. And when we see a person, we feel there are great degree of mobility available at spine because we can flex properly, we can extend properly, we can side bending, rotation, every moment. 6 degree of freedom is available over spine. Six degree of freedom, mobility is available over spine. It means the spine can move in sagittal plane, in frontal plane, in transverse plane. Clear? But apart from this osteokinetic movement, 3 degree of mobility is also available in spine. That is gliding, sliding, and rotation. Suppose if you take 2 spines, this is cervical spine, this is lumbar spine. But we don't have more spine, so I will try to explain the gliding mobility or linear mobility over spine here. Suppose this is your cervical spine, one over other, placed like this. Okay? So, one mobility is available here. 1 degree of freedom, linear motion. Okay? This movement is available over spine. And this distraction. Distraction, AP glide, anterior glide, posterior glide. Okay? Lateral glide, medial glide. 1 degree, 2 degree, and 3 degree. Why I am emphasizing over these mobility? Because when a person sometime come to you, when an athlete come to you with pain, sometimes the cause of pain is decreased mobility, decreased orthokinetic mobility over these areas. Why? Because body is made up, basically body is made up of protein. And when you analyze the protein, protein is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. When we use any tissue, there is some injury, some damage, some degeneration. Nothing is permanent. It will form and degenerate. And when protein degenerate because of injury or because of automatic use, what happens? Their component carbon, hydrogen and nitrogen separated. Carbon dioxide, carbon can make compound with CO2 and releases with lungs. Hydrogen can make compound with O2 and release from urine or sweating. But the nitrogen gas cannot release it. It gets trapped. That's why you feel heaviness, discomfort. That gas is exerting pressure over your neural structure and you will have pain. So when you are able to assess the cause of pain is because the increased amount of pressure, you can have some techniques. I will explain you in next class how can we release these things. So patient will get immediately relief. And in sport, you need to give relief immediately to your athlete. Otherwise, he cannot perform. If a person comes to you with pain or injury and you are not able to help him, your team will lose. So if you are expert enough to assess the problem and are able to give immediate treatment, so your athlete can perform and your team will perform better. So I am telling you, spine has 3 degrees of freedom in linear motion as well as 3 degrees of freedom in angular motion. This is angular, flexion, extension, flexion, extension, angular, angle is formed. See, angle is formed, flexion, extension, side flexion and rotation, 3 degree, and plane linear motion, 1 degree, 2 degree and 3 degree. 6 degree of freedom is available. I am telling one more thing. We, as gross, we see there is enough amount of flexibility available at spine. We can bend up to any extent, we can go back up to any extent, we can side flex, we can. But when you study individual motion at one level of vertebra, there are limited amount of flexibility available at every one. Suppose, as we see, range of motion. If I am bending, you can see the angle formed between lower limb and trunk is around 90 degree. Angle form, and this is the mobility over lumbar spine. When I am bending, this is the mobility over lumbar spine. Same as when I am flexing my side, flexing my neck or rotating my neck, full range of motion available. Clear? But when you study the range or flexibility available at one segment, it is very limited. Suppose cervical spine is made up of 7 bones, C1 to C7, and cervical spine has more amount of rotation. Clear? One level have 5 degree, other is 5 degree, less than 5 degree. So the whole range which we will see is the cumulative of all spine. Suppose he has 5 rupees, he has 5 rupees, he has 5 rupees. The total amount of this class is 15 rupees. Same as if you study the individual amount of motion available at different level of spinal joint is less. But when you add all, you will get enough movement in terms of performance. So second thing, God has make a spinal structure in S shape. When you see cervical spine, there is a lordosis. Again, thorax is bulge. Lumbar is again curve. Sacrum is again, okay. By making this type of spinal column, God has given us a extra edge. Okay. By this means we can distribute load. So no area will be subjected to high stress. But what happened? Because from the, this is the spinous process. This is the spinous process, and muscles are attached. Muscles are attached, and we have proper groove over lumbar spine as well as cervical spine. But because of wrong use of muscle, our muscle get tightened, and because of tightening the muscle, they can drag the bone. Muscle tight hogi. When muscle is tighter, it will stretch the bone towards side, and we will lose the normal alignment of the vertebrae, and it can predispose us for injury. We will discuss next. Now I am discussing the motion available at joint. Spine consists of 33 vertebrae, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 4 coccygeal. If you see the sacrum at coccyx, there is no mobility at all. This is 4 coccyx. This is 4 coccyx tailbone. These are the attachment of 4 bones, and this 5, 1 is sacrum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All are attached. Okay. So this sacrum and coccyx doesn't have any role in mobility, but they are providing a base of support as well as they have more role in stability, and these are the bone which is connected to the your pelvis. As make SI joint, sacroiliac joint, sacroiliac joint. This is ilium and sacrum. It makes your axial skeleton is connected to your appendicular skeleton by means of coccyx and sacrum. Okay. Movements, flexion, reduction in length, angle between bones are part of the body, as in bending forward to touch the tone. This is the flexion of spine. This is the flexion of cervical spine. Clear? Mobility is available only and only at cervical spine and lumbar spine. Some amount of mobility is available at dorsal spine. Clear? When you come from up to down, cervical spine is most mobile joint. After that, lumbar spine is mobile. After that, dorsal spine is mobile, but there is no mobility at sacrum and coccyx. Extension increases the angle between bone or part of the body, as in arching backward in standing position. Suppose when you are trying to make arch, is the extension of your lumbar spine. When you are going back, is the extension of cervical spine. See here in the diagram, person is forward bending, known as flexion. Backward bending is known as extension. Lateral bending, it is lateral side flexion. Side flexion or lateral bending, both are lateral bending, because in both movement you are trying to go away from midline. Suppose see this side, your body is going away from midline. In this movement, your body is going away from midline. This is the side flexion or lateral bending. No medial bending in the lumbar spine, and same as here, side flexion of cervical spine, side flexion of cervical spine, also known as lateral bending. Third is rotation. Third is rotation of lumbar spine. You can go like this. This moment your foot is fixed. Your foot is fixed, but you can able to see this side. Because of rotation available, your spine is going to rotate over one another, and because of this movement you are able to see the right, left. Same as here, when you are going to upper namaz, when you are going for upper namaz, doing salam, left, right, and left. This is the rotation. Flexion, extension, side flexion, and rotation are available over the cervical and lumbar spine. Less amount of flexion, extension, and rotation are available over dorsal spine. No mobility is available over your sacrum and coccyx. Reference book. So these are the joint and these are the movement. By using different terminology, we can describe the motion available. Of how these motions are useful. Suppose a person, athlete, we are going to treat him, we are going to assess him. Until unless we don't know the motion, how can we document the thing? Which motion, which range he has full range of motion, at which joint he doesn't have full range of motion. So by knowing the normal range available, by knowing the axis and plane or number of freedom available, we can assess the joint and we can compare either it is normal or abnormal. And by comparing the things, when we will get complete data, we can provide him treatment accordingly, so we can make patient functional as well as we can improve his performance. Thank you.
In this session, we will be discussing about the analysis of walking, that is gait. Gait can be defined as translatory progression of the body as a whole, produced by coordinated rotatory movements of the body segments. It is characterized by alternative propulsive and repulsive motion of the lower extremities. It is associated movements of the upper extremities also along with the lower extremity movements. Now gait consists of a lot of gait cycles. So So, a portion of the gait can be considered as a gait cycle. Gait cycle can be defined as motion from initial placement of the supporting heel on the ground to when the same heel contacts the ground for the second time. This area is considered as one gait cycle. That is, initial contact or initial placement of the one extremity to that point where the same extremity or same heel is in contact with the ground for the second time, and the duration between these two contacts is considered as a gait cycle. So, it includes all the activities from the initial contact of that extremity to the point at which same extremity contact the ground again. Now, gait cycle can be divided into two phases. One is the swing phase and second one is the stance phase. Swing phase is the phase where the foot is in air, and stance phase is the phase where the foot is in contact with the ground. So, once a gait cycle, once there is an initial contact and till the same extremity contact with the ground again, the duration, this period is known as one gait cycle, and the movements occurring in this entire cycle is considered, it will contain in the gait cycle, and it is divided into two phases. Once the foot is in contact with the ground, this period is known as stance phase. It is around 60% of the entire gait cycle, and once the foot is in the air, this period is known as swing phase, and it contributes 40% of the gait cycle. Now, there is a period, usually once one leg is in swing phase, other leg will be in stance phase. Now, there is a period of double limb support, that is, the two limbs will be in contact with the ground. So, this is when the lower extremity of the one side of the body is beginning its stance phase and lower extremity of the opposite leg ending its stance phase. There we can get a period of double limb support, and there are two periods of double limb support can be seen in one gait cycle. So, gait cycle can be broadly classified into swing phase and stand phase, and swing phase is the phase where the leg is in the air, and the stand phase is the phase where the leg is in contact with the ground. And stand phase contribute the major portion of the gait cycle, that is 60% of the gait cycle. Now, stance phase again can be divided into different steps or different categories. The first is the heel strike, then comes the foot flat, then mid stance, then heel off and toe off. And swing phase again can be divided into acceleration phase, mid swing phase and deceleration phase. We will go through each phases again. That is, stance phase consists of the first point of stand phase is the heel strike. Heel strike is the phase where it is the starting of the gait cycle. Heel strike is the phase where the heel is in contact with the ground. That is, it is the instant at which the heel of the leading extremity strikes the ground, and this phase is the heel strike. And the second phase is the foot flat. So, just after the heel strike, the next phase of that next phase is the foot flat phase. That foot is fully contact with the ground, and this phase is the foot flat phase. And next phase, just after foot flat, comes the mid stance phase. In the foot flat phase, the weight of the body is not in the extremity, in that reference extremity, and in mid stance weight, all the body weight will be directly over the supporting lower extremity, and this phase is the mid stance phase. Now comes just after mid stance phase, what is happening is that heel off phase starts. Heel off phase is that heel of the reference extremity leaves the ground. This is the phase where heel of the lower extremity, the reference extremity, leaves the ground, and next phase is the toe off phase. Of toe of the extremity leaves the ground is the toe off phase. So the stance phase consists of again five again subdivision. First one is the heel strike, then foot flat, mid stance, heel off, and toe off. Heel strike is the phase. Heel strike is the point where the heel of the extremity contact with the ground, and foot flat, once the foot is fully in touch with the ground. Mid stance, the body weight will be transferred to that extremity. It is the mid stance phase. Then heel off phase is the heel of that extremity leaves the ground, and toe off is the phase where the toe of the same extremity leaves the ground. Now sink phase. Sink phase is the phase where the extremity is not in the ground, it is in the air. So again, it can be divided into three phases. The first one is acceleration phase, second one is mid-swing phase, and the third one is deceleration phase. Acceleration phase, just after toe off, the toe of the reference extremity leaves the ground, and it goes backwards. Once the toe of the reference extremity leaves the ground, it goes backward posteriorly and comes anteriorly, and it is the point at which the sim extremity is that contact, that is from toe off until the extremity is directly under the body, and this phase is called the acceleration phase. Again, acceleration phase is toe of the reference extremity leaves the ground until the point at which the swinging extremity is directly under the body. That phase is called acceleration phase. Second part of the swing phase is mid-swing phase. Mid-swing phase is the point at which the ipsilateral extremity passes beneath the body. This point is called mid-swing phase. And next phase is the deceleration phase. Deceleration phase is from mid-swing phase until the next heel strike. The phase is called deceleration phase. Again, swing phase can be classified into three parts. The first one is acceleration phase, from toe off until the extremity is under the body is called the acceleration phase. Second one is mid-swing phase, where the extremity is beneath the body, and the deceleration phase is the phase where the extremity leaves the tibia, passes the body, and until the extremity touches the ground again. Now there is another classification called RLA classification. That is Rancho Los Amigos is the name of the classification. This is another classification, almost similar type of classification of the gait cycle. Here, heel strike will be considered as here in RLA classification. The term for heel strike is initial contact. Heel strike to foot flat is known as loading response. Foot flat to mid stance is known as mid stance again. Toe off is known as pre-swing. Toe off to acceleration is known as initial swing. Acceleration to mid swing is known as mid swing again. Mid swing to deceleration is known as terminal swing. So RLA according to RLA classification, the gait cycle can be classified as initial contact, loading response, mid stance, pre-swing, initial swing, mid swing, and terminal swing. This is the RLA classification. Now we will be discussing about the time and distance variables of a gait cycle. So there are the temporal variables or time variables includes stance time, single limb support time, swing time, stride time, step time, cadence, and speed. And the distance variable include stride length, step length, width of walking base, and degree of toe out. So we'll be discussing each and everything. First of all, we'll be starting with once we discuss about the distance variable, then only we can discuss the time variables. So regarding the stride length. Stride length is the linear distance between two successive events that are accomplished by same lower extremity during the gait. That is, for example, an extremity, a point of heel strike, from the point of heel strike, the gait cycle starts again till the heel again strikes, the same heel strikes on the ground. That distance is known as stride length, and that distance is known as considered as one stride, and length of that stride is known as stride length of that gait cycle. That is, point of heel strike of the one extremity to the next heel strike of the same extremity. So one heel strike to the heel strike of the same extremity again will be considered as stride length, and it is the linear distance between two successive events that are accomplished by same lower extremity during the gait cycle, and point. It is the point from one point of heel strike to the heel strike of the same extremity again. So it will be same as that of other components like foot flat to next foot flat, or mid stance to next mid stance, etc. will be the same. And the stride length depends upon lots of factors. It includes, one is the leg length or height, age, sex, speed of walking, etc. These are the factors which influence the stride length. Now, in temporal variable, you can see there is a time called stride time. Stride time means it is the time taken for one stride. Next is step length. In stride length, we discussed is that it is the distance between two heel strike of the same extremity. But step length can be defined as, it is the distance between, linear distance between two successive points of the opposite extremities. So this is known as step length, and that point, that is from heel strike, for example, heel strike of the one extremity to the next heel, to the heel strike of the opposite extremity, that distance is considered as one step length, and that point is considered as one step. And the time taken for one step length is known as step time. Stance time is the time taken for we discussed there is stance phase and swing phase, and stance time is the time taken for one in the stance phase, and single limb support time is the time taken for once the one single limb is in touch with the ground, and swing time is the time taken for the one swing, and stride time we already discussed, step time we already discussed, and speed and etc. we'll be discussing it later. Then walking base. Walking base can be defined as, it is a side to side distance between the line of 2 feet. So once we are considering this, if I am standing like this, and this distance between the side to side distance between 2 feet will be considered as my walking base, and it is also known as, another term for this walking base is known as stride width. And next is cadence. Cadence is the number of steps per unit time. So normally the cadence is 100 to 115, and in some studies are saying that females cadence is 116 steps per minute, and cadence is the number of steps per unit time or per minute. And cadence, as the cadence increases, for example, if it can be up to 180, and if it increases more than, the walking will become running, and in case of running, the cadence will keep on, as the running speed increases, cadence will keep on increasing. Then velocity. Velocity, it is the distance covered by the body in unit time, and it is usually measured in meter per second. And instantaneous velocity is the at any instance, and average velocity is step length into cadence. And comfortable walking speed, or CWS, is the walking speed with least expenditure of energy is known as comfortable walking speed. So least energy consumption per unit distance is considered as comfortable walking distance, and it is average is 80 meter per minute. That is, it comes around 5 kilometer per hour to maybe up to between 3 to 5 kilometer per hour. It varies by individual to individual. Depends upon the main idea is that the least energy consumption per unit time is the comfortable walking speed, and comfortable walking speed will be differ from individual to individual. The next parameter is line of progression. Line of progression is the line approximating the center point between both feet along the path of progression. So actually, it is the line of progression is the path of progression, and it is the line, center line between 2 feet is considered as line of progression. Next parameter is degree of toe out. It is the angle of foot placement. So once we start walking, our line of progression is between these 2 feet. But at the same time, we are not keeping our legs straight. We are keeping our legs bit angulated, and it is known as the degree of toe out. That is, once we are measuring from the point of heel, that is measured by the angle formed by each feet's line of progression and line intersecting the center of the heel to the second toe. Once we are drawing a line like, there will be a line of progression, and once we are drawing a line from heel to the second toe. So this angle is known as degree of toe out, and it is normally a 7 degree is the degree of toe out, and as the walking speed increases, the degree of toe out keep on decreasing. Now we will be discussing about the determinants of the gait. Determinants of the gait means these are certain adjustments made by the body itself to keep the center of gravity to a changes in the center of gravity to a minimum level. That is, these are the adjustments made by the body to keep the movement of the center of gravity to a minimum. There are 6 determinants of the gait. It includes the lateral pelvic tilt, or it is also known as lateral tilt or pelvic drop. Then stance knee flexion, knee intractions, ankle and foot interaction, forward and backward rotation of the pelvis, and physiological valgus of the knee. These 6 determinants are some adjustment made by the body to avoid hike or lowering of the center of gravity and keep the movement of the center of gravity to a minimum. So we'll go through each determinants briefly. The first one is the lateral pelvic tilt. So lateral pelvic tilt starts, or pelvic drop starts, in the single limb support. Once the single limb support is there, the center of gravity goes into a hike. So what the body will do, the lateral tilting of the pelvis occurs, or pelvic drop on the side of the unsupported extremity occurs. So what will happen? Again, the center of gravity lowers. So hike of the center of gravity can be lowered by the lateral pelvic tilt or pelvic drop. So lateral tilting of the pelvis or pelvic drop on the side of the unsupported extremity keep the peak of the rise lower than if the pelvis did not drop. Because of the drop produces adduction of the stance hip. So this causes dropping of the center of gravity from a hiked position. So lateral pelvic tilting or dropping on the unsupported side during the mid stance prevent an excessive rise in body's center of gravity. Now next is the knee flexion at mid stance. Again, once there is knee flexion, it shortens the leg during stance. So flexion at the beginning and end of the stance, it avoid abrupt changes in the center of gravity, and it flattens the arc, so there won't be any abrupt changes in the center of gravity because it shortens the leg during the stance and keeps the center of gravity to a normal level. Next is knee, ankle and foot interactions. That is, It's a combined movement of knee, ankle and foot, which avoid abrupt changes in the either in the vertical displacement, that is either hike or lowering of, to avoid either hike or lowering of the center of gravity. The changes from downward motion of the center of gravity to heel strike to an upward motion at the flat foot is accomplished by knee flexion, ankle plantar flexion and foot pronation occurs, and relatively shorten the lower limb and prevent the abrupt rise of center of gravity. Once there is an chance of abrupt rise, so it shortens the extremity. Once there is lowering, it lengthens the extremity by using knee, ankle and foot interactions. So when center of gravity falls to at the mid stance, a combination of ankle plantar flexion, foot supination and knee extension at the heel off slows the descent of center of gravity by a relatively lengthening of the stance extremity. So once there is a hike of center of gravity, there is shortening of the extremity, and once there is a lengthening of the once there is a lowering of the center of gravity, it causes the lengthening of the center of gravity. These interactions causes the lengthening of the center of gravity and keep the changes in the center of gravity to a minimum. Next is the forward and backward rotation of the pelvis. So once there is forward and backward rotation of the pelvis, it causes again lengthening of the extremity. Lengthening of the extremity means again the hike of the center of gravity. That means that this act, that is forward and backward rotation of the pelvis act when there is lowering of the center of gravity. So lengthening of the extremity, again the center of gravity will be at the normal level. So pelvic rotation relatively lengthen the extremities and therefore minimize the drop of the bodies of the center of gravity that occurs at the double support. And this action, that is forward and backward rotation of the pelvis, occurs at the double support phase. Then next is the physiological valgus of the knee. Once we studied the knee joint, what we already discussed what is physiological valgus, and there is a angulation on the medial side of the knee around 180 to 185 degree, and this is known as physiological valgus of the knee. And this causes it is also a determinant of the gait. And base of support relatively narrow and little lateral motion is necessary to shift the center of gravity from one lower extremity to another lower extremity over the base of support. And the other determinants what we discussed was to decrease the upward and forward downward movement of the, just a second, retake. Physiological valgus of the knee. It is the base of support is relatively narrow. Little lateral motion is necessary to shift the center of gravity from one extremity to another extremity. Physiological valgus we already discussed in last class regarding once we were discussing about the knee. Physiological valgus is the angle formed at the knee joint, at the medial side of the knee joint, and is an angulation around 180 to 185 degree. And this is a normal thing, a normal valgus, and it is known as a physiological valgus. And this physiological valgus is considered to be as one of the determinant of the gait. And once there is physiological valgus, it decreases the lateral motion of the center of gravity. That is, the base of support is relatively narrow because of the physiological valgus. The base of support is less, and so that the lateral motion of the center of gravity will be very less. Now we will be discussing about the kinetics and kinematics of the gait cycle. Kinematics means the movements occur in a body, the movements occurring, and kinetics means the forces which causes the movement. There are external and internal forces which causes the movement. There are external and internal forces acting during the gait cycles. The external forces include inertia, gravity, and ground reaction forces. Ground reaction force, it is the force exerted against the force acting by the body itself, and it is equal to the magnitude but opposite to the force applied by the body. And internal force, everybody will be knowing, it is produced by the muscles itself. And there is a point called center of pressure it is the point where the maximum pressure is applied over the through the leg, through the foot to the ground. So it is the center of pressure. It is the maximum. It is the point where maximum pressure is applied at each cycles. Now we'll go through the hip joint kinematics, that is movement occurring in the hip during each cycles of during the gait cycle, that is each phases of gait. From the you can just go through the we can just go through the graph, and at the point of heel strike we can see it is around 22. The upper side of the graph is the point of flexion, and lower side, that is minus, is extension. Now at the point of at the heel strike point, at the point of heel strike, the hip joint is, you can see hip joint is around 25-degree flexion, that is hip flexion is around 25-degree. From there the hip starts its extension, and at the point of mid stance, you can see at the point of mid stance it reaches 0 degree, that is it's keep on extending, and at the point of mid stance it reaches 0 degree. Then from mid stance again the hip keep on extending. You can see once at the heel strike it is around 25 degree of flexion, you can see, and once it is mid stance it reaches 0 degree, and from the mid stance onwards again it keep on extending, and it reaches a 20-degree hyper extension. That is at the point of toe off it is around 20-degree hyper extension. You can see minus 20 around in the graph. So it is around 20-degree hyper extension. From there again the hip start its flexion in the later motions. It goes into flexion up to its maximum. So this is the kinematics. This is the movement happening in the hip, that is from flexion it goes into extension till toe off. From there again goes into flexion. So that is the kinematics of the hip. Now we'll go through the kinematics of the knee joint. That is at the heel strike, you can see at the heel strike it is around 0 degree. We can say it's around 0 degree. From there it goes into flexion, and then again into extension, and then goes, that is knee first goes into a flexion, and that is up to a 5 degree of flexion, and then into 15 degree, and again into 5 degree of flexion, and then goes up to 45 degree of flexion. At the point from mid stance to toe off, at the point of toe off it is around 45 degree of flexion, and again knee goes into an extension. So this is the kinematics of the knee joint during the gait cycle. And once you go through the ankle joint, what are the movements happening in the ankle joint? First of all, it is in plantar flexed position, and again more plantar flexion occurs, then goes into dorsiflexion, ankle goes into dorsiflexion, and then after some time it goes into plantar flexion again, then dorsiflexion again. It is obvious in the graph. Now next side heading is the methods of gait analysis. That is what are the different methods to analyze gait, and the importance of this is that to find out whether any pathology is there in the gait, any extra energy is used in the gait, etc. So the different methods used for gait analysis include observation, force platform, cine films and video camera based systems, EMG, chromatography, etc. First one is observation. Everybody will be knowing the most easiest and most simple way is once the person comes to your a doctor can easily find out once the person comes to his clinic how the person walks and what is the abnormality. Otherwise let him walk again and we can easily observe the changes, what are the abnormalities in the gait. And next is the force platform, next is cine films, etc. Now we'll go through force platforms. Force platforms are certain platforms which is embedded on the walkways to measure the ground reaction force and estimate the kinetic components. That is, we can find out how much force, how much torque, how much power values applied to the joint. And force platform will be embedded in the walking ways. And we are asking the subject, asking the person to walk above these force platforms. And from how much force will be applied, how much pressure is applied to over the press platform, how much torque is applied, can be find out from the force platform. And uses the steadying gait, either walking and running. We can find out the ground reaction force through force platform, how much is the vertical and propulsive impulses, what is the progression of the center of pressure during the gait. And also it is force platforms are used for steadying posture, analysis of center of pressure, impact of forces during landing, and in the gymnastic also this force platform are used to find out how much force is used by the hand. And next is video camera based systems. That is by using these video cameras we can observe what are the pathological changes, what are the abnormalities in the gait. Gait or walking is a coordinated activity of lots of systems, including in the nervous system, muscular system, and the coordinated movement of all these systems works together and forms the proper gait cycle. So any abnormalities in this system, either in the bone or neurological abnormalities or muscular abnormalities or soft tissue abnormalities or any other abnormalities, any coordination problems, these will cause us a deformities or pathology in the gait. So an osseous deformity or a bone deformity or a neurological deformity or a muscular or soft tissue deformity or a functional deformity causes pathology in the gait. So osseous deformity includes either a congenital deformity, later developmental deformity, or metabolical deformity, or a neoplastic deformity of the bone causes diseases of the bone, causes any abnormalities in the gait. Again, in the neurological we can see any sensory deformity or a motor deformity or any spastic or any paralytic problems. Paralysis also causes any pathological gait. Then muscular deformities like muscular issues like soft tissue issues like contractures, fibrosis, laxity, etc. also creates the changes or pathological deformities or pathological gait. And functional deformities like lack of coordination, any neuromuscular issues also causes the pathological gait. Now we'll go through some important pathological gaits commonly seen among the peoples, among the population. The first one is Trendelenburg's gait. Trendelenburg's gait is also called gluteus medius lurch gait. So usually seen in case of hip dislocation or muscular dystrophy or in case of gluteus medius paralysis. Here what is happening is that the trunk shifts over the side of the weak muscle in the stance phase to minimize the fall of the pelvis. The trunk will be shifted towards the side of the weak or paralyzed side. So this is called Trendelenburg's gait. Another pathological gait is the paralytic gait. Paralytic gait is seen in case of any muscular paralysis, which the muscle may be important for the gait cycle. Once this muscle gets paralyzed, so the type of gait is called paralytic gait. In case of any muscular paralysis, the person will attempt to bring the center of gravity towards the muscle in stance phase. So in case of quadriceps gait, the person will try to bend and he tries to support the quadriceps, the knee, and another attempt is to bring the center of gravity towards that muscle. It is the paralytic gait which is seen in case of paralysis. Next type of gait is the antalgic gait. By the name itself, it is due to the pain. So person tries to avoid pain during walking. So the steps will be quick steps, soft steps and short steps. The steps will be quick, soft and short, and this type of gait is called an antalgic gait. Next gait is the foot drop gait. So it is also called high stepping gait. That is, in case of foot drop or paralysis of the dorsiflexors of the ankle, so he has to lift the knees more to avoid the dragging of the, to clear the foot from the ground. That is, we studied how much is the normal 45 degree up to knee flexion up to 45 degree and hip flexion will be also there. Here what is happening is that due to the paralysis of the dorsiflexors, the foot will be dropped, and in order to avoid the foot drop, in order to clear the foot from the ground, the person lift the knee high and clear. This is also called high step gait. Next type of gait is the Parkinsonian gait. So it is seen in Parkinson's disease. It is also called fascinating gait. Here the trunk is bent forwards, legs and arms are stiff, and with short shuffle steps will be there. So we will feel like he is chasing the center of gravity. This is the type of gait. That is, trunk will be bent forward, legs and arms are stiff, and with short shuffling gait, the person will walk and is as if he is chasing the center of gravity. Another type of gait is the scissor gait. Scissor gait is seen especially in cerebral palsy. That is like scissor. The person will be, the legs will be crossed and walk. That is, adduction and internal rotation of the hips causes an equinus feet and flexion at the knee. This is scissoring gait. So it is seen in cerebral palsy. That is, today we studied what is gait cycle and different phases of gait, that is sing phase and stance phase. Again, the classification of sing phase like heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, toe off, and the sing phase, classification of sing phase like acceleration, mid sing and deceleration. Then we discussed about the RLA classification also. Then the time and distance variable like stance time, single limb support time, sing time, stride time, step time, cadence, speed, etc. And then today we discussed about the different determinants and the adjustment made by the body to keep the movement of the center of gravity. And we discussed about the 6 determinants in this session. Then we discussed about different kinetics and kinematics, what is happening in the hip joint during the gait cycle, what is happening in the knee joint during the gait cycle, and how much angulation is there in the ankle joint during the gait cycle. Then after that we discussed about the analysis, how we can analyze the gait, what are the different methods to analyze the gait, how we find out the pathology of a gait, and these things we already discussed in this session. Then we discussed about the causes of different pathologies of gait and some pathological gait also we discussed.